paintings that Sylvia made, and I began to work with them to see if not only I found the voice of the mill worker who was a suffragette, but I scoured around to see if I could find other women who'd worked in the trades that Sylvia was painting. And I found a 1970s programme about women chain makers who'd been interviewed, and so I was able to work with some of the voice recordings of that, and I was very drawn to the live action as well. So it's sort of a mixture of Sylvia's words, her handwriting, her typescript, and what they're saying about their chain trade. So.
Oh, I should have said, Will, do you mind thumping the switch out there, please? That's great, thank you.
1905, that's when I started to work in that chain. 1905. And I'd half a crown a week.
Oh, I think that's... something's gone off there.
There we go.
I think it may be... come back into it.
$1905, that's when I started to work in the med chain. 1905. And I'd half a crown a week. From Monday morning, 7 o'clock, till 7 o'clock at night, till 2 o'clock on a Saturday afternoon. Half a crown a week.
But most of the chain was made by half workers. And they used to go and fetch a bundle of iron, and the women used to carry it on their shoulders and bring it home. And they used to climb the cradley hill, and it was a big hill. When she'd made her iron, they used to have a dobbin, a square dobbin with 2 wheels on, and that's how they used to take the chain away, as they called it.
We just got off the tools and the pair of blow banners. Didn't have the blessed thing, not to the women. And we used to get the steel up in the fire. And then we got the tools to shape it. We used to have to shoot it, and then there was a piece of steel with a pointer, and we used to shoot it on that, like all them big ones.
Then we knocked that and that together. Then we'd got to put it in the fire again. And then when it was hot, you got to mind it didn't burn off, you got to have it just right, and then you bring it onto the anvil, and then we used to knock it together, you know, weld it. We used to weld it.
It was heavy work, but I really was pretty good at it. Although I could have done without it. It used to, of course, make your hands hard, you know.
So one of the things, because I've never made a documentary before, I'm really wrestling with all this information and material that I'm finding. So I'm just sort of lashing it together and seeing what works and what doesn't work. And obviously there's an overload of information, so I'm gradually, this is sort of sketched information I've got, I've lashed it together, and this is now what I'm working through to try and bring out the meaning and get rid of the things that are overloading.
Do you have an idea of the length of the film?
I'm aiming for about 20 minutes as a film. Yeah, about that. And so I've also tried another approach where it's more of a meditation on something that she wrote about, which is because Sylvia was imprisoned for her activities as a suffragette 13 times, and she wrote about that in one of the books on the suffrage movement. And one of the sections she wrote about was seeing when she was in prison, she saw the pigeons in the courtyard. Everything was grey apart from the pigeons she saw in the yard as she was allowed to walk for an hour. And she noticed this colour, and it gave her such a great, she always had a painter's eye, and so this, you can sort of through her writing see this colour that sings out against the grey. And so I started looking at pigeons, and I noticed that the pigeons had suffragette colours on their necks. So I thought, that's really handy. And so, and the other thing that insulted Sylvia when she was in prison, that the prison clothing had a daubed arrow, a broad arrow, you know, the arrow marks that are on prison clothing. And she was really insulted by how crudely the arrows were daubed on the clothing. So I sort of was putting those two things together and having a play. So this is kind of an experiment with thinking about the arrows and the pigeons. The other thing that Sylvia designed was that little brooch, the silver brooch, that was in a portcullis shape that had an arrow on it. And she designed that for women who'd been imprisoned for the suffrage cause. And when they came out of prison, they were awarded that little brooch. And so that was one of Sylvia's other skills, was to design some of the objects and materials relating to the suffrage movement. So it's still very much sketching with the ideas of the film. But the next section, this next clip, I wrote a letter to Sylvia Pankhurst I was trying to find a script or a way to structure the film, and I did it in the form of a letter to Sylvia. And around about that time, I'd understood that Sylvia had one son called Richard, and he was still alive but quite elderly, and he called me, and I was working on my letter to Sylvia, and he called me, and I went to meet him, and I asked him to write a letter to his dead mother as well. And I persuaded him to read it, write the letter and to read it to me on camera and sometimes on audio. So this is a little bit of him reading that letter.
I also attempted to write your biography, which led to the monograph Sylvia Pankhurst, of Artist to Crusader. Writing this saddened me, as it showed me that there were many aspects of your life which I could and should have collected information about, but had failed to do so. In this book, which is largely devoted to your art, in which there is currently interest increasing, I reproduced the painting of a dignified old woman in black without specifying her name or identity. I realized, with a sense of guilt, that I must have seen this picture with you 100 times, but had never troubled to to ask who personally built it.
Another way of trying to find a structure was I came across this large doll's house that had lots of rooms, like an Edwardian doll's house, and I thought about doing a 3D storyboard with scenes in it, but I realised it was a distraction, but I quite enjoyed making the puppets to go inside it, and so that didn't quite work. But I had the idea of, because there's no photograph of some key moments in the history of the suffrage movement, and such as the beginning, this first meeting of the Women's Social and Political Union, and so I thought that you could have a reenactment of the event, a bit like when Chairman Mao started the Communist Party. You can get sort of wax models of all the Communist Party standing around, and so that sort of thought, well, if it's good enough for Chairman Mao, I thought it would be good to try that. So I was trying it with puppets. But also, one of Sylvia's activities, after a lot of activity in the suffrage movement, at the beginning of the First World War, the suffrage movement was sort of put on hold for some of the time, but still going on in the background during the First World War. But what Sylvia did, because she was so well known in the East End for being able to fix things for the local poor women, they all went to her and said, look, we're starving, our husbands have gone off to war, we have nothing to eat, we're not getting any money from the government, there's no welfare system. And so Sylvia set up toy factories and cost-price restaurants in the East End to help women get food. Some of them were sent to factories to work, but then they didn't have time to cook or look after their children, so she set up creches as well. So it was really interesting how, she turned from suffrage to welfare very, very quickly. And this is a wonderful picture of one of her toy factories, and she arranged with Selfridges to sell the toys, but I haven't been able to locate any of them, but I guess they are lost because they're made of cloth.
That does seem to be a recurrent thing in your work, cloth, but also that there seems to be a thread, if you'll pardon the pun. That was not a deliberate pun.
Yes.
In the artefacts you're finding, the cap with the material with the arrow on and so on.
Yeah,
I mean, your work is very textural, as we've seen. I think, is that possibly a way in that's starting to manifest itself?
Yeah, maybe it is. Yeah, it's a good thought. Thank you, Martin.
Oh, okay.
So also, just to return to Richard's letter, here's a clip of him reading, and just to explain a little bit about Richard, because Richard was born in 1927-28, which was when women got the vote, so it was the end of the suffrage fight for the vote, and so he wasn't involved in the suffrage movement, but he got involved in Sylvia's next campaign, which was repelling Mussolini from Ethiopia. And so Richard was very, very engaged with her activity, helping Haile Selassie and fighting the fascists. She early on recognised that this first fascist movement of in Africa had to be nipped in the bud, and so she tried to get the British government involved to fight against Mussolini, but because it was so far away, they didn't want to get involved. But eventually they did, and so that just gives you a little bit of background. So why there's an Ethiopian chair sitting there, and it explains a little bit of what Richards talks about. This is Richard.
Mummy, that sunny September in 1960, when we were living in Addis Ababa, 5 of us decided to take advantage of a long weekend to go camping beside one of the Rift Valley lakes. It was that weekend, shortly before our return, that you had your fatal heart attack. I was not there to hold your hand, but the hospital staff were with you, as was the Emperor's daughter, Princess Dinami.
I think that's all I was going to show of that. Yes. Okay. So you can see I'm sort of being pulled towards live action as well, which is, you know, it's quicker, but also it's that thing of maybe seriousness as well. You know, that somehow animation can be a bit frivolous almost at times, so you have to be really careful how you use it.
It's ironic, really, isn't it?
Yeah. So that's what I've been struggling with, and then but there's one thing that is going on, because Sylvia has been a bit overlooked compared to Emmeline Pankhurst. There's now money being collected for a statue of Sylvia. There's a statue of Millicent Fawcett just recently gone up in Parliament Square, which is the first statue of a woman to be put up in Parliament Square. All the rest are men, and it's the first sculpture by a woman as well, because it's by Gillian Waring. So it's a good start that Millicent Fawcett, she's the sister of Elizabeth Garrett Anderson, who was the first doctor. So, you know, really key people. But Millicent Fawcett was one of the law-abiding suffragettes. She didn't use militancy and set fire to things or blow up post boxes and things. And
do you think that's why she got the statue
yes,
first?
I do. Well, I think so. But this one is this here is making a short clip of. There's a moquette for Sylvia's statue, so it's been designed, money's being raised, and they've now got a venue for it outside the Marx Library. She was much more left-wing than her mother and her sister. So she started the Communist Party in the UK, actually, and corresponded a lot with Lenin. So her statue will be on this little patch of land outside the Marx Library in Shoreditch. And yeah, I'll show you this. And using this moquette, I was thinking about how to end the film in some way, or connect up her interest in movement. Sorry, the clips are so short, but and then just something that I've been working on more recently, because trying to work with all these archive photographs and elements, that I came across an artist, Andrea Arts, who's quite local to me in South London, and so we've collaborated on making some of these folded images of photographs, and I think this might be a way forward to work with some of the archive photographs. So I've done a tiny experiment, so tiny it's gone. No, it doesn't want to play. Try coming back into it. So just trying to work with the folded photographs and adding movement to try and bring Sylvia alive, but in a very minimal way, so that I'm not losing the impact of the photographs. So that's what I've been working with lately. So that's all I'm going to tell you about the Sylvia project, but I'd just like to add a little bit more about the next thing. I've been also, alongside the Pankhurst project, I've been working with Marina Warner on a project working with refugees, and this is fairly new to me. So, Marina Warner's been working on it for a couple of years now, and she started off the project because she won a prize and wanted to use the prize money for a particular project, and she saw that the refugee crisis is the thing that's most dominant, the biggest problem that's going on at the moment. She really thought that the refugees not only needed food, water, etc. She really thought that they needed, she wanted them to be able to have the right to culture and imagination, and that even if they've carried not much else with them, they have their imagination and they can work with stories. Because Marina is famous for her interest in fairy tale myths, and she realised how international some of the stories are. So, and I got involved because I suggested, well, it would be interesting to. She was working with artists and dramatists and painters and musicians, and I suggested bringing animation into the mix as well. And so a couple of weeks ago I went out to Palermo in Italy and worked with a group of refugees, and we storyboarded one of the stories that one of the refugees told, which was from his grandfather. So it's him remembering a story his grandfather had told. So, and everybody drew pictures. He told the story as a verbal thing, and then everybody drew pictures, and then we were cobbling it together into some sort of film. And I think it's really nice to be able to contribute something for a start, because you feel so helpless about the refugee crisis. So it's been fascinating I've only spent a few days, but I hope that over the next year we'll go again and bring it into some sort of fruition. It'll be very rough, but something will come of it, I'm sure. And each time Marina goes out there, she has some sort of event that helps people to feel joy and have the pleasure of drawing or making or creativity.
I can see a connection thematically between this and your other film on Sylvia Pankhurst, the representing disenfranchised groups. Do you think there's
Maybe, yeah. Maybe that. I think it sort of helps me to do this project. They're helping me more than I'm helping them, probably, because it is about that. It's finding a visualization for someone who's not there, who can't speak for themselves.
But were she alive today, I'm sure she would be an avid campaigner for their rights.
Yes,
And particularly with her background as an artist.
Yeah,
I'm sure
she would be out there. She would be setting up camps, and she would be. They would be making things, and that's what Marina's doing. Actually, she's set up a website for them, and she did story workshops, and they came up with story games, which they now sell on a website. And so you can, and they got permission to go to Brussels, and they talked to the UN about some of the projects they've been doing, because they're such a good example of hope, really, finding something constructive to do with your time when you're in this terrible situation of no papers and limbo, basically, no identity, no right to remain. But still, the images they come up with are fantastic. There's some really beautiful drawings that they did. So.
Yeah, I like the bird. It's great.
Yeah, he took images of Archimboldo, which of course is Italian, and just showed pictures of Archimboldo, and then we bought spices, and then got them to adapt their drawings into spice.
You go and animate it?
Yeah, they will.
Under the camera?
Yeah. We have a little...
Good luck with that.
Well, you can, just about slow though, but they're meticulous though, how when they introduce them to animation. We did some animation as well. I haven't got it with me, but it worked well.
And you say how this is helping you with the other projects. How so? Is that to sort of keep your ideas ticking over and
well, they come up with solutions very quickly.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I think that it's very refreshing. That, because I suppose I'm working in isolation, so it's nice to be working in a group like that.
I wanted to ask you about that, but maybe we should save that for later in the evening. Would you like to do a Q&A or?
That would be fine. I'm finished now, so that's it. Yes.
Right. I'm sorry. Well,
so yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Can I ask a question, Joe?
Yes.
With your folded photographs, are you doing them under the camera, or are you sort of scanning them and putting in computers, or how are you approaching all this stuff these days?
I've been photographing them standing up in 3 dimensions, and then animating them in After Effects.
All right, so you've been cutting them out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, sort of puppetizing them,
Yeah.
essentially.
Yeah.
But it loses their 3-dimensionality, so I
Yeah,
really
exactly.
like to make them 3D and move them in 3D.
Because it looked like you've done it under the camera. It looked very nice.
Yeah. They have a really nice presence,
Yeah.
I think. So I think that's
Had a
going to be
cut-out
interesting.
feel to it, which
Yeah.
is, sometimes you lose that when you get into After Effects.
Yeah. But you know, I kind of want to go back to scanning them in 3D and then be able
Yeah,
to move
exactly.
them completely, and even go around the back. But I haven't done that yet. I think that'd be the next thing to try. But also, I've been making this film for a long time, so I want to get finished. So
Yeah.
it's an endless experiment, or get finished and move on to something else. So that's the other dilemma.
Every animator's dilemma.
Yeah.
So what's it like working? You've worked as part of your own studio. You've done all sorts of collaborations. Working on your
Yeah.
own, what's that like?
I enjoy it, but I'm not as disciplined as I should be, and I get distracted. But it's quite nice because you can come back at things and you know, really express the idea that you're trying to get at, and really try and pull it out of yourself.
Yeah.
But it is, I do try it out on people occasionally, different sections. I have shown it to people. So I do need that feedback loop.
Are you engaged in any way with an academic institution or with a charity or anything, or do you have an engagement with some sort of organisation that represents Sylvia Pankhurst?
Well, with Helen Pankhurst, I'm in touch with, who is the daughter of Richard.
Right.
But I'm not really working very closely with her, although she owns the rights to the material, so I have to negotiate with her for the rights to use the material,
Yeah.
which she's given me, and Richard gave me them. So the family is my nearest,
Sure.
and they have a lot of the paintings as well.
Right. So you are having to show your work to them. So there is some kind of
Yes,
feedback.
yeah,
going
they've
on.
seen some of it. Unfortunately, Richard has now died.
Oh, right.
Yeah, so Helen is now in charge of the archive.
Right.
Well, the rights to the archive, and then a lot of the material is held in Amsterdam,
Right.
the Institute of Social History.
So
there.
why you said that a lot of the work was in Amsterdam? What's her connection with Amsterdam?
The reason all her papers are in Amsterdam, so her drawings, her typescripts, and her handwritten notes. And the reason they're there is because they are interested in social history, and she
Right.
was much more of a socialist than anything else.
Right.
So it fits very well with what their focus is and their mission statement of that collection. But also, I think they were one of the few places that would take the whole of her archive.
It's scandalous that a British organisation, a
Didn't
British
want to take it.
institution
Yeah,
would,
well, that's it. They
would
wouldn't.
take it.
And there's also a mismatch between how the text and the written elements are archived compared to the pictures. You know, pictures are just not archived with such care. Astonishingly.
Really?
So I'm interested in the pictures, the photographs, and things like that. But there's very little about them. Whereas the written elements are all carefully written about and archived, and that seems to be something. What interests me about going into archives and bringing animation into archives is that you have a different interest.
Yeah.
You know, you as an animator or as a visual artist, you're interested in the visual material,
Yeah.
and also the materiality of the written material.
Yeah.
So and that's what I'm interested in. What can animation bring into the archive?
Sure.
And
sure.
so that's my question. You know, if I were to apply for research funding.
Sure.
But at the moment, I'm, pressing on with it as it is.
Yeah.
So can I just is that a commission for someone in particular, or is
No, it's not. No, it's. I started making it when I was teaching at the Royal College of Art, and then I've carried on making it myself. And the National Film Board of Canada are interested in it once I finished it in terms of distribution. But yeah, I'm working on my own.
so they don't have any? There's no commissioning and
No.
arrangements and anything to do.
No, so it's up to me. So
Is the kind of seems like quite an organic process you're going through.
Yeah.
To make those. Is that a new thing with working for yourself?
well, I suppose I usually go through this
Yeah.
process.
Is it just because we've only seen like finished products from the other stuff?
Yes, yeah. Because with any of the projects, I've usually started off doing a lot of tests. Because with the Mushroom Thief project, I started off just trying out animating in a field first of all with a figure, and used that to help write the script.
Yeah.
So, often it all works together.
So there's not a like storyboarded.
No, it's very hard to work, but you need to get to the storyboard script stage. But you might have done a lot of visualizing first to get to that point. So, and that's something that I worked a lot with at the Royal College as well. That the writing was not like a confined process. The writing carried on throughout the whole process, and I think that's really important to keep the writing alive and to help deepen the understanding of the idea as well. Because writing can help clarify, but also image making can help inform and get to a sort of a deeper psychological meaning somehow.
There's quite a collage of different styles in these things.
Yeah.
Do you have like a goal to like choose one, or is the idea that
I think I want to keep the collage in there, and I quite like the different styles, but I am aware that it's confusing, so I sort of need I need to make a lot of decisions about it. But yeah, I know, because I think because I can go in different directions. And there was something about the puppets in the doll's house that was not right. But I had cut out paper heads, and so when I saw the paper cut out photographs, that's when I I was struggling to get to something, and this I really like. So it sort of led me by a long way to something that's slightly more sophisticated, that I think says more that I want to say about Sylvia. That I don't want to present her as a handmade person in a way. I want her to be quite sophisticated in some way.
Seems to be quite a lot going on, because you worked with actors a lot on the Mushroom Thief, didn't you, and performance, and quite a lot of writing and performance work in the teaching environment. So I haven't seen the Sylvia as the statue kind of moving. It's quite a different way of thinking about performance and reenactment that's happening now.
Yeah. Well, I do like I want to try and use the sculpture, and I like getting her dancing and try and link that to some of her drawings of the skirts as well, because that I find it quite hard to think of being a woman wearing those long skirts somehow, and how that makes you feel. So, and the fact that the statues have the long skirts, but they're also it's such a specific shape, isn't it? A woman in a long skirt is such a, I don't know, when you look at it, you sort of, it's I don't know, it reminds you of the past so strongly because of the length of the skirt somehow.
Well, this is of gender conformity, which seems very out of date today.
Yeah. So, but I want to bring that in to show that she's from the past as well.
It's interesting what you're saying about the written word and the visualization and so on. And traditionally, in Britain, it is a word-based culture. The primacy is, for whatever reason, is with the written word. Did you come up? What was it like for you as an artist, as a visual artist, engaging with an archive of written texts?
Yeah, it is I want to be able to pull out the important text, but I find it very, very difficult because, you know, I am dyslexic, and so the words sort of swim anyway, but I want to be able to pin that down more. And I think I want to wrestle those words, the meaning out of those sections of text, but also I'm seduced by the handwriting and trying to make movement let movement come out of the handwriting. But then that's getting lost in the pictorial instead of sticking with the meaning.
It's just, what I meant more was that archivists, particularly of universities, tend to be very much about the written word and so on, and perhaps don't quite know how to engage with someone with a very different outlook. Did that cause any problems?
Well, it hasn't yet. And when I've done talks at sort of women's history conferences about the project, and talked about, you know, not being able to access objects unless you've got a serious, you know, if you want to, a lot of objects are not on display in museums, are they? So they're held behind. And if you want access, you've got to sort of give quite formal reasons for why you want to look at the brooches that Sylvia designed or something like that. But when I've actually tried to access, it's been relatively easy to get in there. It's more my own barriers that I've put there, having too much respect for the objects that are in archives in some ways. I think, I mean, one of the issues is that historians are not interested in the pictures, and when they give a talk they're interested in the story that is told. They're not so interested in the visual, and so you have to be careful of the audience. You know, I need to decide who I'm making the film for, because historians wouldn't find it serious enough.
No.
Because it's too pictorial. But that's one of the problems of making a documentary, isn't it? It's you know, choosing the audience you're trying to reach.
But you sort of highlighted something there, which is the idea, the received wisdom that the written word is the serious thing, and the pictures are the sort of, you know, somehow more trivial, and I find that terribly frustrating.
Yes, it is. Yeah.
To know what things look like.
But I think that's why I like the Marina Warner's approach, because she sees the symbolic meaning in pictures as incredibly important and empowering. And she sees how they are carried in our stories, in our heads, you know, the images. And so I think that's why it was particularly valuable for me to go and do that workshop. And somehow there's something there. There's a connecting point there. I haven't quite worked it out, but there's something there.
Yeah, absolutely fascinating.
Can I ask a question? So on your other work, it's a great sound, fantastic sound in all the animation.
Thank you.
And I just wondered, do you think in sound when you're thinking in pictures? Do you think in sound too, or do you think primarily pictures, like the image?
I do think of some sounds, but I've been very lucky to work with some great sound designers, and two of the films there, The Mermaids and The Web, were both, the sound design was done by a guy called Nigel Holland, who unfortunately is not very well at the moment, but he just has a fantastic, when you know, I start early with a sound person describing what sort of thing I'm trying to do, and then there's always a dialogue with music and making recordings and trying things against the picture in a rough way, and then because there is no sync sound when you do animation, it really cries out for having some sound, and some things you have to animate to a sound effect, so you want that sound effect or something early so that you can make it fit properly. But it's a really important relationship with your sound person, I think, and with your sound mixer as well. And Nigel was just particularly talented with those two films as well. And I've used a lot of Foley in both films, so that you make the sound to the picture, because that a sort of vivacity, you know, sort of to the movement. So when a character's running up the stairs or something, to have somebody actually, you know, doing it to picture, it adds a gravitas or a reality to the character, which I think is really important, to make it feel like that character is really alive in some way, even though you know it's a puppet.
But it draws you in, you start believing in the story rather than thinking it's a puppet moving.
Yeah.
You know, it brings you into the story.
Yeah.
Your move into 3D, broadly speaking, 3D animation is quite a bold one, and it's interesting how your craft is very much apparent in the figures themselves. But that film, I remember you saying a while ago, that had an interesting reception. How sometimes you make a film and you don't anticipate what its audience might be. Do you mind saying a little bit about
with the mermaid film? Yeah, it was because of the subject matter. It went to a lot of lesbian and gay festivals because they like the subject of artificial insemination, and I hadn't anticipated that at all, but it was great that it had such a good outing. And but there was, in terms of technique, people were confused as to whether it was computer animation or whether it was clay. And I've seen write-ups where people have said it is clay animation, when actually it's entirely computer animation. But I modelled in plasticine and then laser scanned the plasticine figures into the computer. So it has that handmade look.
So it seems that within your craft you have quite a broad outlook. You have sort of certain sort of central theme or identity, but also you're working in 3D, you're doing stop motion in a field. You are now you are now doing documentary. You're animating records in an archive and so on. That does suggest quite a broad vision.
Yeah, I suppose with each project, the technique sort of suggests itself. So the idea for the film comes, and then you make some experiments to find what technique seems to resonate with that subject. And so for this film, because it's working with different things like images and then text and then live action, and everything sits on a slightly different plane, and I think that's why I find it hard to cut together. So I don't know if that makes sense, but it's the way my brain sort of works, that the live action stands up more. It's a peculiar thing, but there's a problem of when you're working with different sorts of media, of getting them to work together in equal standing is hard, because you can't. Of course, you can use film just to dissolve and not worry about it, which is probably the right thing to do. But when you're putting it together, sometimes you find that two things just will not sit next to each other at all, because one thing sets up a mood and then the next thing throws it out of that mood that you've set on.
It's very nice to see something that's, broadly speaking, a documentary in which animation is used as a central element of it, whereas we're so used to BBC4 documentaries which are presented to camera in locations, then you have a little animated interlude to illustrate something, whereas here these are threads that are...
Yeah, I'm trying to use animation as probes into the archive, and then if I probe in and see what I can reveal. So sometimes there'll be a sequence of photographs from that same photo shoot.
Yeah.
And if you animate, like there's two photographs of Sylvia and Richard, I haven't shown that bit here, but they were in the same studio, and then it was only by animating between them I saw that they went from not holding hands to holding hands.
Oh, I see.
But it's only when you add animation that it actually makes you look differently.
Yeah.
So I think that's what animation can help with in an archive. Rather than being an illustration, it can actually go to try and fill in the missingness.
Really, literally, almost creating another dimension to it.
Yeah, in some way. Yeah.
There was a class at the RCA last year where we had an archivist come in, and he was researching some magician, artist and magician. And the only record they had of him at the RCA when he was a student was in a formal complaints procedure with Sylvia Pankhurst.
Okay, yes.
So I wonder if you actually found any records of the RCA.
I know they exist. I've read excerpts from the complaints because there was was it Spears? No, not,
that rings a bell, yeah.
Yeah, and but yeah, there's no imagery, but there's just this formal complaints because they took it outside of the college. Even Sylvia got a question asked in Parliament about why there were not any not equal amount of bursaries for women students as for men, and then later she started this complaints procedure about whether the teaching was of a high enough standard at the college.
Yeah.
But it was very, very interesting to see who gave evidence and for how long, and it was basically 3 of them, including Sylvia, who gave most of the evidence. But is someone trying to make a film then about that person?
No, this archivist published a book on some like tarot cards that the other complainant made later in his career. But, yeah, it's just a strange overlap too.
Yeah, I think Sylvia, the guy that did the tarot cards, Sylvia, he'd published a book to raise some money for to live on, and Sylvia, because she was quite an independent student, she bought one of his books, pre-bought it, and all the other female students asked her to buy one for them because they didn't dare buy one of these books because it's a little bit racy, the material that he was drawing. So she was obviously, the woman about town, whereas the others were more shy. But this was 1904 to 1906, so it's quite early time. But anyway, thank you.
Any more questions?
The little mermaid thing, I was intrigued by the 2 little men figures running up. Were they little male?
Yes, they were males.
Where did they go?
They had. That's their business. they were just men things.
They're only men.
They joined men on the land. Yeah, they went to be sailors.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes. So what was the BBC Two ident from? What year was that BBC Two ident Christmas thing?
I can't remember exactly which year.
92, 93.
Well, 1993 I looked at.
93.
Yeah.
When you were a baby.
Yeah.
Yes.
Or how about how did this mermaid idea thing come about? The influence one from Henry Moore.
The idea came about because I was imagining. It was to do with the moon, actually, because the moon. The moon supposedly controls the tides, and I thought, what if some women could grab the sea and control the moon, and sort of reverse it? So that was the beginning point, and that the story came from that.
Any more questions? Well, may I give a massive thank you to
very much.
Joan Ashworth. Joan to come here for a very long time, so it is really, really, really wonderful. We're back in a month. I'm hoping to move the club back to Tuesdays, because Wednesdays seem to be quite difficult, and certain logistical problems I had are now more or less completed, so I'm going to try to move it back to Tuesdays. I might be doing, if anyone's interested, doing a curated group screening of work by members of the club, and I'm hoping, no, he's gone home, but I'm hoping that Joe King will be joining us before too long as well. So one more round of applause, I think.
There's a couple of things to give away. away here if anybody would like them. There's a mushroom thief and
somebody else's class.
I haven't seen that one.
Have a picture.
Thank you so much.
When am I going to see you? When am I going to see you again?
Well, we need to have tea and cake.
Yeah, absolutely.